In the vast, silent landscapes of the Arctic North, a different kind of war was waged. Here, in the winter campaigns of the Second World War, soldiers in places like Finland and Norway faced an enemy far more relentless than any human adversary. It was an enemy that did not carry a rifle or wear a uniform. It was the cold. Temperatures would plummet to unimaginable lows, dropping to 30 or even 40 degrees below zero. The wind was a physical force, a blade that cut through layers of wool and cotton, seeking out any exposed skin. It was a battleground where the very air a soldier breathed could freeze the moisture in their lungs. The danger was constant, insidious, and unforgiving. Frostbite was not merely a risk, it was an inevitability for the unprepared. Fingers and toes, the body's distant outposts, were the first to succumb. They would turn a waxy pale white, losing all feeling as ice crystals formed within the cells, destroying tissue from the inside out. Men who were brave and strong, who had faced down enemy fire without flinching, found themselves helpless against this silent, creeping attacker. The cold drained their strength, slowed their minds, and stole their will to fight. In this brutal theatre of war, survival was measured not in days, but in hours. For many, the initial instinct was to fight the environment head-on. They built large, roaring fires, believing that a massive blaze was the only answer to such profound cold. But these fires consumed precious fuel at an alarming rate and tragically offered a false sense of security. While one side of a soldier might be scorched by the intense heat, their other side remained exposed to the freezing air, creating a dangerous and inefficient cycle of warming and chilling. Furthermore, the bright flames and rising columns of smoke acted as a clear beacon, betraying their positions to the enemy. It was a strategy born of desperation, and one that often led to disaster. The early patrols sent into these unforgiving territories paid a heavy price for this lack of understanding. Squads would venture out, full of purpose, only to be found days later, frozen solid, sometimes just a short distance from their own lines. They had not been defeated by bullets, but by the sheer, overwhelming power of the Arctic winter. It became tragically clear that conventional tactics were useless here. Courage and determination were not enough to keep a man's blood from freezing in his veins. A new kind of knowledge was required, one that did not fight against nature, but instead sought to understand and work with it. In the early stages of the Arctic conflict, military commanders held a firm belief. They believed that endurance was a matter of will. A soldier's resilience, they thought, was a direct reflection of their bravery and physical toughness. To complain of the cold was seen as a sign of weakness. The prevailing wisdom was to simply push through, to grit one's teeth and march onward, ignoring the body's desperate signals. But the Arctic does not recognize courage. It only recognizes thermodynamics. A human body, no matter how brave its owner, will lose heat to a frozen environment. Without a way to manage this loss, even the strongest soldier is doomed. The consequences of this mindset were devastating. Men on long-range patrols, burdened with heavy equipment, would sweat from the exertion. This moisture would then freeze in their clothing, turning their protective layers into sheets of ice. They were, in effect, wrapping themselves in the very element they were trying to escape. They believed that stopping to rest was a surrender to the cold, so they pushed on, becoming progressively weaker. Their bodies were burning through calories at an incredible rate just to stay warm, leaving them exhausted and vulnerable. This was a battle they could not win through sheer force of will. It was a painful lesson, learned through immense suffering. The turning point came when commanders and soldiers alike began to realize that their greatest enemy was not the cold itself, but their ignorance of it. They had to unlearn the instinct to simply tough it out. They had to learn that managing body heat was just as crucial as cleaning a rifle or reading a map. Survival was not about enduring the cold, but about escaping it. It required a shift in thinking, from confrontation to adaptation. The key was not to generate more heat, but to preserve the precious warmth the body was already producing. This realization sparked a quiet revolution in Arctic warfare tactics. The focus shifted from enduring the elements to manipulating them. Soldiers began to observe their surroundings with new eyes. They looked at the deep drifts of snow not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as a potential resource. They saw the very substance that threatened to freeze them as a possible source of salvation. This change in perspective was the first step. It was the moment they stopped fighting a losing battle against the Arctic and started learning to use its own properties to their advantage, transforming a deadly environment into a life-saving ally. The great irony of the Arctic is that the solution to the deadly cold lies everywhere underfoot. The answer is snow. To the untrained eye, snow is simply frozen water, the very essence of cold. But in reality, a deep blanket of fresh snow is one of nature's most effective insulators. The secret is not the ice crystals themselves, but the immense volume of air that is trapped between them. Freshly fallen snow can be up to 95% trapped air. This pocketed air is a poor conductor of heat, meaning it dramatically slows the rate at which warmth can escape. It works in the same way as the fiberglass insulation in our homes or the down feathers in a winter jacket. Understanding this simple principle is the key to Arctic survival. The ground, even when frozen, is often warmer than the air above it, especially when insulated by a thick layer of snow. And a human body is a constant source of heat, a furnace that radiates warmth. The challenge, therefore, is not to create heat, but to trap it. By digging into the snow, a soldier could escape the biting wind, which is the primary accelerator of heat loss. But more importantly, they could create a small, enclosed space where their own body heat would be contained, unable to escape into the vast, cold atmosphere. This is why a simple snow shelter can be so effective. As a soldier occupies a small snow cave, the heat radiating from their body begins to warm the tiny pocket of air around them. The surrounding walls of snow prevent this warmed air from dissipating. The temperature inside the shelter can rise dramatically in a very short amount of time. While the outside air might be a deadly minus 30 degrees Celsius, the temperature inside a one-person snow shelter, warmed by nothing more than body heat, can quickly climb to near freezing point or even above. This is a temperature difference that means the difference between life and a frozen death. The process is remarkably efficient. The colder it is outside, the better the snow acts as an insulator, as the temperature difference between the inside and outside of the shelter increases. The structure itself is simple. A trench dug into a deep drift or a cave hollowed out of a snowbank is all that is needed. The entrance should be low to prevent the warmer air, which naturally rises from escaping. This elegantly simple structure uses the laws of physics to turn the soldier's greatest enemy, snow, into their most powerful shield against the killing cold. It was a piece of ancient wisdom, rediscovered out of pure necessity. The evolution of the snow shelter among soldiers was honestly a rapid process of trial and error, driven by the urgent need to survive. The first attempts were often pretty crude. Simple trenches dug into a snowdrift, covered with a poncho or, well, just a few pine boughs. While this offered some protection from the wind, it was definitely not enough. The key innovation really was the roof. Soldiers learned to build up walls of compacted snow blocks and then create a low enclosed roof, leaving only a small crawl space for an entrance. This simple act of enclosing the space was transformative, allowing body heat to accumulate effectively for the very first time. The Norwegian resistance fighters, operating in their own frozen mountains, perfected these techniques. They became true masters of the impromptu shelter. A team of men could construct a functional refuge in under an hour. They learned to use small details to make, honestly, a huge difference. For instance, a single candle lit inside the shelter could raise the internal temperature by several more degrees. The tiny flame produced a surprising amount of warmth, and the enclosed snow walls trapped it perfectly. They would even use a spare piece of cloth to hang over the low entrance, creating a simple but effective door that sealed in the precious warm air. There are, incredible accounts from this period that sound almost miraculous. A patrol of soldiers, on the verge of collapse from exposure, their fingers and toes already numb and white with the onset of severe frostbite, would frantically dig into a snowbank. They would crawl into the dark, freezing pit, their bodies shivering uncontrollably. But within minutes, the environment inside would begin to change. As the collective heat from their bodies and perhaps a single candle filled the small space, the shivering would subside. The feeling would slowly, and often painfully, begin to return to their extremities as warm blood was allowed to circulate once more. This rapid reversal of frostbite is, well, a biological marvel. When the body is exposed to extreme cold, it enters a state of self-preservation. It constricts the blood vessels in the arms and legs, pulling warm blood back to the core to protect vital organs. This is what causes frostbite in the extremities. By entering a snow shelter, the soldier escapes the external cold, and the body senses that the immediate threat has passed. It relaxes its defensive state, allowing the blood vessels to dilate again. Warm, oxygenated blood rushes back to the frozen tissues, re-warming them from the inside out and quite literally saving the limb from permanent damage. The lessons learned in the brutal Arctic winters of World War II were not forgotten when the guns fell silent. The knowledge of how to use snow as a life-saving shelter was codified and passed down. Today, this very technique is a fundamental part of winter survival training for elite military units all over the world. Soldiers from the United States Army's Northern Warfare Training Center in Alaska to the Royal Marines in Norway are taught how to build quinzees, snow caves and trench shelters. They learn that their most important survival tool is not in their pack, but is the environment itself, if they know how to use it. This principle extends beyond the military. Mountaineers, Arctic explorers, and even recreational winter campers are taught the same skills. They learn that in a blizzard or an unexpected cold snap, a properly constructed snow shelter is far superior to even the most advanced tent. A tent will block the wind, but it provides very little insulation. A snow shelter does both. It is a testament to the simple, effective, and timeless nature of this technique. The knowledge that saved those soldiers over 80 years ago continues to save lives today in some of the world's most inhospitable places. The story of the Arctic shelter trick is more than just a tale of military ingenuity. It is a profound lesson about our relationship with the natural world. It shows us that survival often comes not from fighting against nature, but from working with it. The soldiers who perished were those who saw the snow as an enemy to be conquered. The ones who lived were those who saw it as a resource to be utilized. They listened to what the environment was telling them and adapted their behavior accordingly. They chose understanding over brute force, and in doing so they found warmth and safety where others found only a frozen grave. In the end, the most powerful weapon these soldiers possessed was not a rifle or a grenade, but knowledge. It was the understanding that a blanket of snow could be warmer than a fire, that a small cave could be a sanctuary, and that their own body heat was a powerful furnace if only they could trap its warmth. This legacy reminds us that in any struggle for survival, whether on a battlefield or in the great wilderness, the ultimate advantage comes from observing, learning and respecting the immense and often counterintuitive power of the natural world. It is a wisdom that is as relevant today as it was in the darkest days of the war.